Khandanam bhavam bandhanam jaram bandhanam bande tamay niranjanam nararupam dharam niranjanam nararupam dharam nirgunam gunam Chanam agam dushanam jagam dushanam chid dhanam kay gyanam janam Vimalam Nayanam Gyanam Janam Vimalam Nayanam Vikhanem Moha Bhaktar Janam Yugala Charana Bhaktar Janam Yugala Charana Taranam Bhava Par Jrim Veta Yuga Isharam Jagadisharam Yoga Shahai Niram Dhanam Shamahitam Manam Niram Dhanam Shamahitam Manam Nirakhim Tava Kripa Bhanjana Dukha Ganjana Karunaghana Karma Kathar Pranar Panam Jagata Tarana Pranar Panam Jagatam Tarana Krintana Kalindor Vanchanam Kamam Kanchanam Pati Nindita Indriya Rag Tagish Sharam Hem Naram Varam Tagish Sharam Hem Naram Varam Deha Padem Anurag Nirbhayam Gatam Shangshayam Driranyishaya Manasa Van Nishkaranam Bhakata Sharana Nishkaranam Bhakata Sharana Taji Jatim Kula Man Shampada Tava Sri Padam Bhava Goshpada Vari यथा प्रेमार्पणं क्षमं दर्शनं प्रेमार्पणं क्षमं दर्शनं जगजनं दुःख संपद तव श्रीपद भव गोष्पद वारियथा प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन जग जन दुःख जाय नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनातीत मन वचनैकाधार प्रभु मन वचनैकाधार ज्योतिर्ज्योति उज्जल हृदय कंदर ज्योतिर्ज्योति उज्जल हृदय कंदर तुमि तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमि तम भंजनहार नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनातीत मन वचनैकाधार प्रभु मन वचनैकाधार ज्योतिर्ज्योति उज्जल हृदय कंदर ज्योतिर्ज्योति उज्जल हृदय कंदर तुमि तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमि तम भंजनहार धद धलंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग धद धलंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग गाइছে छंद भक्त वृंद आरती তোমার গাইছে छंद भक्त वृंद आरती তোমার जय जय आरती তোমার हर हर आरती তোমার शिव शिव आरती তোমার खंडन भाव बंधन जग बंधन बंदे जय श्री गुरु महाराज जी की जय। ओम ह्रीं ऋतं त्वमचलो गुणजित् गुणेभ्यः नक्तं दिवं सकरुणं तव पादपद्मं मोहङ्कषं बहुकृतं न भजे यतोऽहं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारी गच्छन्तलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तत्त्वं वक्त्रोद्धृतोऽपि हृदये न मे भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ति तरसां त्वयि तृप्ततृष्णां रागे कृते ऋतपथे त्वयि राम कृष्णे मर्त्यामृतं तव पदं मरणोर्मि नाशं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषं कुहकान्तकारिं शान्तं शिवं सुविमलं तव नाम नाथ यस्मादहं तु अशरणो जगदेकगम्यं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतार वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमः श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमः श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमः श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ सर्वमङ्गल माङ्गल्ये शिवे सर्वार्थ साधिके शरण्ये त्र्यम्बके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। सृष्टिस्थिति विनाशानां शक्ति भूते सनातनी गुणा साये गुणमय नारायणी नमोस्तुते। शरणागतो दीनार्तं परित्राण परायणे सर्वस्यार्ति हरे देवी Narayanim Namostute Jayonarayanim Namostute Jayonarayanim Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute. जय महामाई की जय जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय जय स्वामी जी महाराज जी की जय.
Check. Hello. The statement of Maya is not some kind of a theory or some speculation. It's essentially stating in one word a certain fact, certain existential fact, namely that of the contradictions and in some sense very deep-rooted fundamental contradictions in our existence. Yeah? And last time we had ended with this particular set of sentences. Death is the end of everything. Death is the end of life, of beauty, of wealth, of power, of virtue too. Saints die and the sinners die. Kings die and beggars die. They are all going to death, and yet this tremendous clinging on to life exists. Somehow we do not know why we cling to life. We cannot give it up. And this is Maya. This is one of the first times this particular sentence occurs. And he illustrates this one particular fact, namely, knowing very well that each one of us is mortal and death is going to come and visit us at some point of time. We live by ignoring it and holding on to life as if it's the single most valuable thing that can possibly exist, knowing full well that it is going to cease. So there is a contradiction there. Now he comes to another pair of contradictions, and we'll read this paragraph, but before starting on it, there is one thing that I'd like you to sort of make you aware of before we start it. Here, what he is really trying to do is bring out the difference between love and attachment. We'll go on giving these examples more and more. Somebody had asked for examples, and actually this whole lecture, the whole first part of it, does consist of examples. The mother is nursing a child with great care. All her soul, her life is in that child. The child grows, becomes a man, and perchance becomes a blackguard and a brute, kicks her and beats her every day, and yet the mother clings to the child. And when her reason awakes, note, when her reason awakes, she covers it up with the idea of love. She little thinks that it is not love, that it is something which has got hold of her nerves, which she cannot shake off. However she may try, she cannot shake off the bondage she is in. And this is Maya. Another instance, another example of the kind of conflicts that we are in. The point is, love is not supposed to cause some personal anguish, right? I mean, it is supposed to bring fulfillment in itself. Whereas here, it's clearly something that is bringing pain. So this is not what love is about. So for instance, I mean, think of a much larger thing that did exist. So during our freedom struggle, several people gave up their lives for the country. But they faced death, faced pain fearlessly. That subjective feeling of pain was not there. Why? Because that larger, more impersonal feeling of love overshadowed the personal feeling of pain. Yeah? So mark this, and here essentially what is being differentiated from, I mean, it's essentially attachment is always something that brings a motion or movement of our of our mind towards the body. Yeah, it's through the body, so that it becomes something narrow, limited, specific. Moving away from it, seeing it in its larger context, that detachment, and if detachment and the same kind of feeling is associated, that's what is called love. So essentially attachment, the emotion behind or the feeling behind attachment, minus its physicality, minus its specific limited locus, is exactly what love is about. And here, the reason that there is this, the critique that Vivekananda is making here is that this limited thing is being called love, which it is not. Love itself is something much nobler, much larger. It's born of a certain appreciation of identity of all of existence, in particular one's own existence in a large consolidated whole. And that same thing is expressed as empathy, sympathy, etc., etc. Well, it's identifying oneself with others, which is what love is about. Here, that's not the case, because it's some very specific locus that is being focused on. Yeah? And this confusion between pairs of qualities which are exactly the opposite of each other in a certain sense, love and attachment here, this confusion, this not being able to discern the difference between the two is exactly what is being called Maya here. So it's a phenomenon which basically defines our existence in a certain way, which confuses these two pairs of opposites. Yeah? That's what is being discussed here. Next example, this is about our aspirations. We are all after the golden fleece. Every one of us thinks that this will be his. Every reasonable man sees that his chance is perhaps 1 in 20 millions. Yet, everyone struggles for it. And this is Maya. So the golden fleece is a placeholder. Say, for example, say something like, this whole business of lottery tickets, yeah? So that's the psyche that it's based on. That's the particular psychological fact that it's based on. What are the chances of winning a huge pot of money in lottery tickets? It's very small. Yeah? Obviously, because if that was not the case, then the people who are selling you those lottery tickets, they would not be making a profit. So evidently, the total amount of money that people get by selling lottery tickets is more than whatever the prize money is. Otherwise, the person who's making a business of it would not be earning money. So that's naturally the case. And the thing is, when we do buy a lottery ticket, what's going on? There's a chance, in some very small chance, of suddenly getting a huge amount of money and not being able to resist that. If one was calm, level-headed, one knew that the chances were very slim, and nobody would buy a lottery ticket. But because people are willing to take that chance, and at the end of it, okay, fine, I'll lose 1 rupee, but so what, or maybe today 50 rupees or 100 rupees. But if one wins, one is going to get a huge amount. This particular kind of psychology is what leads to the buying of lottery tickets. And it still goes on today. We know that the chances are very slim, yet we go on performing that act. In other words, during that performance, our reason has left us. So we are just taking a chance almost for the heck of it, for just for its own sake. Yeah? And this particular kind of lack of reason, lack of analysis is again this confusion between reason and unreason is what is being called Maya here. And again he returns to this theme with which we started today. Death is stalking day and night over this earth of ours. But at the same time, we think we shall live eternally. A question was once asked of King Yudhishthira. What is the most wonderful thing on this earth? And the king replied, every day people are dying around us, and yet men think they will never die. And this is Maya. Again, this confusion. See, what does I mean, everybody around us is mortal. So basically that the immediate inference applied to oneself is that I shall die at some point of time. But during our day-to-day activity, this particular fact of life, that it ends in death, is not incorporated into our natural way of thinking. This is from the Mahabharata, from the Vanaparva. Yeah? So it's part of what is called the Yaksha Prashna. Yeah? So Yudhishthira had gone and found that all his other brothers were lying dead, and he wanted to get some water. And I think there's the person who owned that water body was some yaksha, some mythical creature, and said, well, you can get water, but you'll have to answer my questions before that, otherwise you'll die. If you give a wrong answer, you die. So Yudhishthira said, all right, fine, ask your questions. And the yaksha asked him a string of questions, one of which is this: what is the most surprising thing in this world? And Yudhishthira's answer is it's a beautiful couplet. Yeah? Ahanya hani bhutani, I have mentioned this here before. Ahanya hani bhutani gachanti yama mandiram shesha sthiramichanti kimascharya atah param. Ahani. Yeah? Ahanya hani. Yeah? After you do sandhi, it becomes ahanya hani. Aha is day. So ahani is saptami. So in every day by day. That's how the first expression translates. Ahanyani, day by day. Bhutani, bhuta means not ghost. Bhuta here just means being. Yeah. So beings pluralized is bhutani. Yeah. Ahanyani bhutani gachanti, goes to. Gachanti, where? Yama mandiram, to the temple of Yama. That means basically goes to the abode of death. That means daily people are dying around us. One. Shesha sthiramichanti, but one will live till the end. That means till the end of time. Shesha sthiramichanti, everybody wishes to live forever. Kimascharya atah param. What is more surprising than this? So on the one hand, our reason tells us that we will die, but our instincts, our feelings do not recognize that as true. We do not function as if this is going to happen to us. There is an explanation, and the explanation is not within the domain of philosophy. It's actually within the domain of biology. The thing is, any action behind that, normally, there has to be a certain motivation. Now, if we as a species gave negative aspects of possible outcomes more weight, we would not be able to progress as a species. We would not be able to do anything. I mean, we'd be just covered with doubt and not be able to progress. Hence, this is something that our brain's computations automatically tells us. And so, all these terrible things, immediately there is a self-preservation instinct circuit that goes on and fires, which basically tells us, yes, these are all terrible things, but they always happen to other people, not to oneself. It's a strange mechanism which is inbuilt in our system somehow to protect us. But what does it lead to? It leads to this particular de-recognition of a fundamental fact of life. In other words, what is happening here is that unreason, opposite of reason, or lack of rationality, lack of clear rational thought, is given precedence over clear rational convictions or clear rational conclusions. These conflicts, on the one hand, an attempt to go towards clarity, on the other, an attempt towards confusion, which makes us oscillate between these poles. These conflicts, are what define our day-to-day existence as soon as we start approaching them using this clear light of reason. And essentially what it tells us is that at the basis of our existence, there is a lot of unreason, lot of unreasonable stuff, lot of conflicts and confusion that come up, very fundamental confusions, And this is exactly this existential fact of confusion, when its locus is the individual, that is what is called, we have said this before, it is what is called adhyasa, imposing the nature or qualities of consciousness as we think it should be on matter, and the qualities of matter on consciousness. This mutual confusion is exactly what adhyasa is called. In Shankara's Adhyasa Bhashya to the Brahma Sutra, that's exactly what he calls it. And in its large-scale universal aspect, this is exactly what Maya is about. So it's a statement of this particular aspect of reality as we know it in our day-to-day life that guide our lives. That's what is being called Maya here. It's not a theory in that sense. It's a statement of this particular aspect of reality which defines our existence. And he goes on, these tremendous contradictions in our intellect, in our knowledge, yea, in all the facts of our life, face us on all sides. And he gives yet one more instance. A reformer arises and wants to remedy the... I'll come back to this particular notion of contradictions later, but let me just go on and finish this part before returning. A reformer arises and wants to remedy the evils that are existing in a certain nation. And before they have been remedied, 1,000 other evils arise in another place. It's like an old house that is falling. You patch it up in one place, and the ruin extends to another. In India, our reformers cry and preach against the evils of enforced widowhood. In the West, non-marriage is the great evil. So basically, this was around the end of the 19th century, where people were seeking grooms or brides, etc. So help the unmarried on one side, they are suffering. Help the widows on the other, they are suffering. And then he gives this somewhat ironic comment. It's like chronic rheumatism. You drive it from the head and it goes to the body. You drive it from there and it goes to the feet. Reformers arise and preach that learning, wealth, and culture should not be in the hands of a select few, and they do their best to make them accessible to all. See, this is again a very fundamental thing. What we usually mean by progress is exactly summarized in this: learning, wealth, and culture accessible to all. Even our missions activities are based on these things. These things should be, this is our external functioning. Yeah? Basically, distribution of knowledge, empowerment of people, culture, etc., etc. But what is the flip side of all this? These may bring more happiness to some, but perhaps as culture comes, physical happiness lessens. The knowledge of happiness brings the knowledge of misery elsewhere. This is the law. Again, so here the two opposites that are being pitched against each other, happiness on the one hand, misery on the other. The young perhaps do not see it clearly, but those who have lived long enough and those who have struggled enough will understand it. And this is Maya. These things are going on day and night, and to find a solution of this problem is impossible. Why should it be so? It is impossible to answer this because the question cannot be logically formulated. There is neither how nor why, in fact. We only know that it is, and that we cannot help it. Even to grasp it, to draw an exact image of it in our own mind, is beyond our power. How can we solve it then? See, this is where he has actually sort of taken these various examples, summarized them, and described them as these fundamental contradictions in our thought. See, here is the thing. So let us look at the highest reaches of reason in the domain of, let us say, science. What happens there? We are investigating, trying to extract knowledge from within our hearts or minds, and in terms of its interaction with the universe around us. Every little question that we succeed in answering brings us face to face with 10 new questions. Long back, this was when I was a student, one of our teachers told us, when we were finishing, about to graduate, he told us that, look, knowledge, or, I mean, in our case, it was specifically mathematical knowledge, it's like a sphere or a balloon expanding in space. What is inside the balloon is what you know. The surface of the balloon is its area, so is its contact with the unknown. So if you increase the knowledge, the awareness of the unknown is going to increase proportionally. So it's not that knowledge is what brings satisfaction. It is this process. Yeah. So typically we try to think of these in static terms. Okay, so this is how much I know. But that's not good enough, right? Why? Because if we move to the boundaries of our knowledge, we are faced with much larger questions about which we have no answer. One of today's finest mathematicians is about in his 70s, Misha Gromov, is a Russian mathematician, now residing in France, partly in France, partly in the US. He made this simple observation. What brings us joy in this scientific quest? It's not the knowledge per se. Subjectively, what is it? It is the learning. It is this removal of ignorance from our minds. It is this gaining of clarity that is the source of satisfaction. And somehow we attribute a goal to it. So somehow our brain tricks us into thinking that there is some goal towards which we are moving, perhaps never going to achieve it, but somehow every moment when we start off with some motivation, there is some goal to be reached. And what this is saying is that the goal is never reached. I mean, the goal, once you achieve it, it turns out to be just one milestone in this ongoing human quest for greater and greater knowledge. Yeah? So, even in this purely rational domain of scientific enquiry, where we claim that our goal is knowledge, what turns out is that every bit of knowledge that we gain increases our ignorance, increases our awareness of things that we do not know. So I think a couple of turns back, we had mentioned this pair of opposite human subjective experiences that are there, say, in the pursuit of mathematics. And we had quoted this particular book by Michael Harris called Mathematics Without Apologies. And the two experiences, on the one hand, charisma, on the other hand, pathos. And we had mentioned this from Greek mythology, the labors of Sisyphus. Yeah? Sisyphus is supposed to be the Greek god who gave man fire. And so he was punished and asked to roll a stone up a hill, and by the time he would reach, the stone would roll down, and so his labor has no end. Yeah, and in some sense, an absurd labor. But this is our condition in that sense, right? So the process itself is what brings us in contact with these contradictions in life and allows us to accept them as something that defines life. Yeah? The motivation is one thing, but that motive very often is just an illusion, is not something that can be achieved in any absolute sense. Yeah? So these pairs of opposites that condition us, that define our day-to-day existence, is what is being called Maya here. Yeah? So last time, when we finished, there was a question in the chat box asking for a reference. So I'll finish with just mentioning that. This is regarding this quote by Carl Sagan that I had mentioned. Carl Sagan, physicist, astronomer, who basically says that it's when you sort of look at the Earth from very far, and he had given this picture brought out by the Voyager 1 expedition, which looked at the Earth from a distance of 6 billion kilometers, yeah, where the Earth occupies less than a pixel in a photograph. That's how inconsequential we are in this cosmic scheme. And then, once you see yourself as a member of a species from this larger cosmic perspective, all these schemes of, leftovers of evolution in certain sense, yeah, all our human feelings, emotions by which we tend to judge our nearby existence, they appear to be insignificantly small and irrelevant, far, far too petty to be given any attention. In a certain sense, many of us are familiar with this kind of a feeling. It's a kind of feeling that you have when you're faced with, say, huge mountains. These have been there for years before us. But the point is, there are things which are much older. But the psychological impact that these have is very real. These mountains are still and huge, much larger than any individual's existence. They have seen much more of history, and they will see much more of history when you and I will no longer be here. In a certain subliminal and vitally relevant way, the mountains convey to us this impression directly. As if, and here we have to go into the domain of poetry to express that sentiment. It's as if they are telling us that, look, our existence is nowhere near as important as we make it out to ourselves. With this particular larger impersonal background, the contradictions in our life then start making sense. What has happened is your mind itself has detached itself from its specifics and is being able to accept life and its contradictions just as a witness. This is where this thing is headed. What is being seen has its twin aspects. But the witness or the awareness that recognizes both these things is neither good nor bad. It is not fraught with any of these polar opposites. That is where this is headed. That is where. So it's this recognition of this pairs of opposites, yeah, is what we are being led towards. And the existence of these pairs of opposites in a very, very mixed and confused form, this state of things is exactly what is called Maya. It is not a doctrine. It is not a piece of theology. It's a word which summarizes this particular existential fact of our lives, that we live in the midst of contradictions. That's all. Once you grasp it, it becomes just a very simple statement of fact. Nothing more. Nothing very profound after that. But somehow, this simple fact of contradictions is what defines our existence on a day-to-day basis. Okay? So we'll come back to this for next time. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.